Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. My name is Rich Mayfield, member 1211. I'm here tonight with Andrew Meieran. And Andrew, you are the owner, proprietor, designer, savior of Clifton's Republic, right? Amongst other establishments in Los Angeles.
Yes. Thank you.
So before we get into the history of Clifton's Republic, can you kind of let us know what you do for a living, so to speak?
Yeah, that's kind of hard to describe. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me here. It's wonderful to be here, and it's such an incredible thing to be around people who have sort of like-minded sense of exploration and adventure, and the sense of wonder of, you know, what's out there and what you can discover. And just walking around this space, it kind of reminds me of so many places. If you've been through Clifton's, you'll certainly recognize some of that. So I guess I'm a collector of things, experiences, and stories and narratives, and I like to share those narratives and things with others. And so what I do is I try to create spaces that engender a story and take that story, weave it with the history of the space, the integrity of the neighborhood, and a bit of the architectural history, the cultural history, the music, the literature, and then pass that on to future generations.
So Clifton's is not just a cafeteria. It's not just a bar, right?
Clifton's is not just an anything. Clifton's is the most remarkable, unique, surprising space I've ever encountered, and potentially one that has almost ever existed, certainly in the United States, with the history as short as it is. I
want to see in the audience, who here has been to Clifton's Republic? You've got some fans here.
It's good. It's good to see it. In the history, 190 million people have passed through the doors of Clifton's. So that's just sort of a sense of what the legacy and history of the space is. It's 90 years old. It came out of the Depression, and since then it's been a beloved portion of Los Angeles history and Angelino history.
So when was Clifton's built?
Originally it was a Bose Brothers cafeteria in the 20s, and then Clifford Clinton, who was the founder of Clifton's, he purchased the lease during the sort of the depth of the Depression. He purchased actually two. There's the Pacific Seas and the Brookdale location.
So this location, is this the one on Broadway, just down the street?
Actually, no. This is the one that was on Olive Street. This is the original Pacific Seas, and this actually opened as the Cafeteria of the Tropics in 1931. So this was the very, very, very beginning of the Polynesian sort of fantasy adventure craze in Los Angeles.
So is this normally counted as not like one of the first tiki establishments in the United States, or no?
Yes, it sort of seen, because it wasn't a bar, it isn't necessarily seen as a tiki establishment, but it was a year before Don the Beachcomber actually was founded. So it was actually the original location that was truly Polynesian fantasy.
Is there a little bit of rivalry between who was first? I mean, everybody knows Don the Beachcomber, right? But
yes. This is, there's, you know, just like anything, the origin stories have their mythology all their own, and everybody wants to lay claim to the first or the best or the most interesting or any of a number of different categories. But Clifton's definitely was the first to really embrace this type of aesthetic and this type of culture. And whether it was from the music to the architectural to the sense of what they were serving in terms of food, they really embraced it early.
So when it opened up, what did it start as? Kind of walk me through the history of what Clifton's looked like. This is a contemporary picture.
Yeah, this is a contemporary picture of the current location on Broadway. So Clifford Clinton, when he purchased the cafeteria leases, he was at the lowest point in the Depression. It was 1931, 32. There was just an economic strife. There was cultural strife. He wanted to nourish the mind, spirit, and soul, not just the body. And he had come from a family that created cafeterias in San Francisco, and they had many, many years. They had about 30 years of experience prior to Clifton's. And when he came to Los Angeles, it was a little bit of a rivalry with his family, and so Clifford Clinton was unable to use the Clinton cafeteria name, and as a result, he came up with Clifton's, which added Clifford and Clinton together.
So his family wouldn't let him use?
Would not let him use, which is an entire other story. which is interesting.
So it just started as a cafeteria.
It started as a cafeteria, but it wasn't just a cafeteria. There was a sense that he wanted to be the epicenter of the neighborhood. He wanted to be the cultural center, the beating heart of the neighborhood. And that meant he wanted to be incorporated into the politics, into the cultural aspects, like creating spaces for neighborhood associations to meet, and groups that led to things like the Science Fiction and Fantasy Club meeting with Ray Bradbury within the building. And he created also a sense that he wanted to inspire people. He wanted people to get a respite from sort of this horrific world that was outside during the Depression. So as a result of that, he created these wonderlands. And the one that was, the Brookdale was based upon his childhood favorite locations, which were up in the Redwoods in Northern California near San Francisco. And the other one was the Pacific Seas, which was based upon his travels as a missionary with his family in the early 1900s.
Was that pretty unique in the time? Wow, that's a crazy facade. And was that all living?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. That was completely alive. And what was interesting about it is it had a Beaux-Arts facade originally, and the architectural groups at the time claimed it was the ugliest building in Los Angeles, and decided it was, that he had created, such a horrific thing he had done, which was interesting because 30 years later, that same group were the ones that were trying to save it from demolition. So just goes to show you that times change and tastes change, and but. Originally, that location was based upon the tropics, and it was really, really geared towards, again, creating a neighborhood around the space.
So he was doing experiential dining very, very early. Was that unique in that time period to kind of theme out a restaurant?
It was not entirely unique. They had roadside attractions. What's interesting about the Brookdale location, Brookdale was actually at the root of Route 66. It was actually the starting point of Route 66. Because when they created Route 66, it was actually between the two busiest intersections in the western United States. So it started in Chicago at the busiest intersection at a roadside attraction there, and ended in Los Angeles at Clifton's, which was the roadside attraction. So, and that 7th and Broadway was the most busiest intersection in the western United States at the time.
So that's the place to be if you want to be the cultural center, right?
Exactly. It made complete sense. It was the end of the Mother Road. It was where people, this fantasy, beautiful destination in the West. It was the farthest west you could go, and you would end at Clifton's.
That's super cool. So throughout the history, I think I heard that it had a lot of different owners.
Actually, strangely enough, it had two. There were...
Really?
Yes. There were the family and then me. Which,
so, but explain like so the family did pass it. How long?
They had four. So they had 4 generations of the family that actually that kept it within the family. So it was very much a family operation. And what's really interesting about the family is they started in 1888 with cafeterias in San Francisco, and one of the first, in doing my research, one of the first mentions of a Clinton's cafeteria was actually Mark Twain when he landed in San Francisco, said that he had lunch at the most incredible cafeteria location that he'd ever seen, and it was this warm place in the middle of the cold fog, and that was Clinton's Cafeteria.
Wow.
And so it went and was passed on generation to generation from there.
Wow.
Until me.
So how did you acquire this location? How did you get the family to sell you such an heirloom almost?
Yes,
right?
I had actually created a place called the Edison about 5 blocks away, which is a really, really fun location, which is built in an abandoned power plant and was the first private power plant in Los Angeles. So I had a lot of history with that, and of taking care and being, a caretaker of historic locations. And then also, when I do work to it, I try to be sympathetic to the spirit of the original. So the idea is that I'm not going to go in and demolish it. I'm going to take it and try and maintain the integrity of the location. So
you had a proven track record.
I had a proven track record, and I had experience also in some of the stuff. I have to say that the Clifton's building was, I don't know how to explain it politely, but was not in the best condition. So when I got there, it needed everything, literally, possibly, ever.
So when you got it, What did it have in terms of public spaces for people to come in?
Yeah, what was interesting, so there were at one point up to 11 Clifton's cafeterias, and this was actually the headquarters of them, the Broadway location. So it was one of the first two, but it was the last one standing. So what it had was the original offices, it had the original archives, it had the original workshops, had a lot of the original storage rooms, but downstairs it had the very original lobby and the second floor, which was a dining area and overflow dining. And it had been a long time ago in its life a furniture showroom, so it had little bits of elements of that as well. But the original location, the Brookdale, was built by Welton Beckett, was designed by Welton Beckett, and if anybody knows who Welton Beckett is, he was best friends with Walt Disney. He was actually the individual who Walt first wanted to create Disneyland 20 years after Clifton's. And
really?
So they were good friends, and you can see the influences that they passed along to each other. So the Disney legacy was quite a strong part of Clifton's.
Did Disney hang out in this?
Yes, I had the rare opportunity right before she passed away of meeting Diane, his daughter, and she walked me through a lot of the stories about Clifton's and was telling me,
yeah, move that up a
make
little
this a little easier.
Yeah, a little bit more.
It's hard for me to see where it is. There, is that better?
Yeah, that's good right there.
Much better. Okay, so in my talks with Diane, she told me all about Walt walking through the space, and it was really strange because I would ask her a question, and she would say, Daddy loved that, or, Daddy this and Daddy that, and it's hard to think of Walt Disney as Daddy, but, Uncle maybe, just historically, but, so she told me about, there's this beautiful stone fireplace that's in the main area of Clifton. So if anybody's been there, you have the main stone fireplace, and then you've got a small stone chapel, and you've got a waterfall in between. And she remembers talking with Daddy about, wouldn't it be nice if we had this land that you could go explore with children and families and stuff that was very, very similar to this location. And he pointed up to the little stone chapel and actually started talking about how it would be nice to have a castle. And so this is the original inspiration of
For
the
Disneyland?
Castle, for not only Disneyland, but the actual castle at Disneyland. She said, he pointed up and he said, you need to have that. And that being this focal point that tied the room together and was something that was special and elevated that drew people in. And so that was part of the location. And she gave me the best compliment because I said, well, it was interesting learning the whole history of, of the Disney connection and that they had been there and stuff. And I said, it's funny because people always say it's very Disney-esque. And she made the beautiful comment that she's like, don't let anybody ever tell you that, Disney is very Clifton's-esque. And so that was
that's a pretty big compliment.
I was pretty much done with compliments at that point. That's good. But so originally it was a cafeteria, and it was a cafeteria based on the neighborhood and his experience. But what's interesting about it is he actually went through multiple iterations. There were actually 9 different versions of Clifton's that he did. So he had planned actually an automat. He had planned, strangely enough, of all things, he had planned a bar in the front, and he had planned a sort of an entertainment center on the second floor. So he had all of these different visions of it. And when I was going through Welton Beckett's original designs, which are really beautiful and hand tinted with color, and they're exquisite. But looking at those were actually part of the inspiration of what I ended up doing. So, and a lot of people thought, okay, it's sacrilege to have added bars and whatnot to Clifton's. And I look at the 1931, 1932 drawings of bars and entertainment areas, and I think, okay, this is what he was looking at doing. And the main thing, the reason he didn't do bars originally is he couldn't get the liquor license. And he was actually going through which became a very big part of Clifton's, he was going through a dispute with the city. And he actually politically became very, very active because the health department tried to close him down. He couldn't get the liquor license. And as a result, he basically went to war with the mayor's office. And, it became a story that eventually, things like LA Confidential was inspired by, because he literally brought down the sitting mayor in a recall campaign. And he actually, the police chief tried to have him assassinated and actually blew up his house with a pipe bomb. And his business partner was actually permanently maimed. 2 police officers went to jail. The district attorney was removed, several different people. So it's quite an amazing story. And all of these things are part of this wonderful legacy that's Clifton's.
LA was a crazy place back in the day, huh?
I don't know if it was.
It might still be a crazy place.
It's always been very, very interesting.
It's so fascinating when you hear about this old LA history, because a lot of the stuff we take, it's always been there.
Yeah.
Like Disneyland's always been there. Right, we got that a lot at the Adventurers Club. It's like, we've always been here. This isn't new.
Yeah.
But when you're opening up a place like this, and has it been continuously operating for 100 years?
It had been continuously operating literally until the pandemic.
Wow.
And it was closed for pieces of it were closed at different times. So, one of the things, and this became controversial, I closed the cafeteria and was in the process of renovating it when the pandemic hit. So I closed it about a year before that and was working on times had changed and the mode of people's sort of taste had changed, and also the demographics had changed in that it used to have up to 15,000 people a day would pass the doors of Clifton's and come in. And that was no longer the case. So the business model had to change slightly, and we were in the middle. But
you did major renovations before the pandemic, right?
Did major.
You didn't shut down for any of that?
We did shut down to do that. Yes.
Okay. So kind of give us an overview. I guess there's some people in the audience that haven't been there, but give us an overview of what Clifton's is today.
Clifton's is 6 stories of fantasy wonder environments. And so it's about 50,000 square feet. It's 7 different venues and different locations, and thematically, it acts like a giant diorama. So when you walk through the entry doors, you're walking into a diorama that's a life-size diorama of a forest. And that's where you see the stone fireplace, and you have the chapel, and you've got actual trees and the waterfall. And then as you go up, you actually walk up through it to the 2nd floor, which is like you're going up a hill. You get to what I call Cathedral Grove. And so just like Clifford Clinton was actually inspired by when he was a kid, the Santa Cruz Mountains, I was inspired. I also grew up in San Francisco, sort of coincidentally. I loved the Santa Cruz Mountains, but I also loved Muir Woods, and I also loved Yosemite. So I decided to be inspired by Yosemite and Muir Woods, so I created Cathedral Grove. And that's based upon an area within Muir Woods, which is actually where the convocation of the United Nations took place, and when the memorial of Roosevelt took place. So it's this very beautiful, very special location right in the midst of giant.
And which level is that?
That's the 2nd floor. So that's the big tree that I put in. That's actually a replica.
So how big of a tree?
That one is about 44 feet. And strangely enough, it's a third of the size in terms of actual scale of the original that we reproduced.
So you built a giant 44-foot tree right in the middle.
44-foot redwood right in the middle to create what is sort of a semi-natural atrium space.
So was there an atrium there before, or did you create that?
No, we created that. That was, the idea was, again, taking inspiration from Walt, was the sense that we had to create the sense of wonder and the sense that you get to a certain destination that you can see in the distance, and when you get there, you were inspired by it.
And I think behind this cocktail, we have a picture of that.
Yes.
That redwood tree. What cocktail is that? Because I think everybody's probably
That's a Bloody Mary, actually.
That's an intense play. You got a red jalapeno in there?
Yes, there's multiple versions of that. So we actually have it's funny because we have a group of cocktails called Yosemite cocktails.
Yosemite.
Yosemite. So
okay.
Obviously inspired slightly by something that goes without a name here, but a little bit of tiki involved in the sense and the sense of wonder and play and playing upon the legends and the history and the lore of California's natural wonder.
So that's level 2, the Cathedral Grove.
Cathedral Grove.
Yes. And then how did you organize the space moving up?
So then you sort of ascend up the tree. So the sense is that on the ground, you're grounded. It's the real world. There's an authenticity to being at the forest floor. And as you go up, you sort of elevate yourself from that. So each level is a little bit more fantasy, a little bit more imagination, a celebration of imagination. So on the second floor, you have the base of the main tree. On the third floor, you have the Gothic Bar and the Brookdale Ballroom. And the Gothic Bar is the home of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Club, which originally was Ray Bradbury, founded in that location. And so that is a little bit more where science meets fiction. And you have a sense that you're blending reality and imagination. And then you ascend further and you can go up to the treetops, which is obviously not creatively the top of the tree and the top of the food chain there. But the thing that's adjacent to that is actually the Pacific Seas, which is where you actually go beyond the tops of the trees and you go into complete fantasy, which is the Pacific Seas. And that's the Tiki location.
So tell us about the Pacific Seas.
So the Pacific Seas is this, it's inspired obviously by the original Pacific Seas, and it has an incredible amount of original artifacts from the Pacific Seas, but it also has a lot of artifacts from, all the Tiki Bars that are no longer there. So what's wonderful is we have things from Trader Vic's, and we have Don the Beachcomber, and we have Bahuka, and we have Tiki Bob's, and we have a lot of the locations that are these legendary, wondrous locations that are no longer with us. So it pays homage to all of Tiki history, and Polynesian history, but also at the same time, it has an authenticity of new curiosities and wonders that are there. And so, and I think the Tiki is a little bit of a misnomer for the Tiki culture and Tiki bars. It's more, a sense of an adventure bar. It's the sense that you really are in search of discovery and exploration and all these wonderful things you can find, and it's for people who are not able to get there right now, but want to experience that and want to be able to have a view of that, and who doesn't want to sort of escape, at least for a moment, and it allows that.
It's so cool. So I've got to ask though. A lot of these Tiki bars closed down.
Yes.
And you picked up their stuff, and arguably, Clifton's being one of the first. You might have some right to it, but do you get hate mail, or do you get people complaining about you pulling stuff in from other bars and like, oh, that used to be Trader Vic's, but now it's here?
No, because a lot of the stuff closed a lot before. The one thing that was really interesting, which is really random, but I think a lot of the things that happen at Clifton's are really, really random, and maybe they're not coincidence, but we were having the holiday party for the Edison, of all things. And the holiday party, people in hospitality don't have that during the holidays. They have it after in the beginning of the new year. We had it of all places at Bahuka. And so I don't know if anybody knows what Bahuka was. It was the most remarkable, wonderful, special Tiki bar. Incredible location. But as we're having this incredible party for the Edison, the woman says, well, that's a wrap. And I said, what does that mean? She said, this is it. This is the last party we're having. We're closing. And this is a place that had been there for 40 plus years, and this incredible location. And she literally said, you know anybody who needs some Tiki stuff? And I was like, I might know somebody. And so I ended up purchasing everything that they had. So most of what you see is actually Bahuka, a good 2/3 of it.
And that is so cool that stuff gets used. And I think as far as authenticity goes, at some point all this stuff becomes authentic, right? Because in the 20s it was there's some collecting, right? People went out and explored and they brought stuff back.
Yep.
But there's some element of imitation when you build a Tiki bar, right?
Yeah, there's been layers and layers of that have gone over the years. I mean, one of the things that Tiki was always based on a sense of authenticity, that you were bringing back these authentic goods and artifacts from around the world for people to actually experience. So originally it was based upon that. It became, other than that, things that were inspired by. And it's good also because some incredible artisans and artists came out of that and created, works of art of their own right.
Right.
But it's interesting to marry the two and actually have the authentic, wonderful works of art. And what was really amazing about Pacific Seas, what I was able to do, pretty much everything in there is authentic. So, and when I mean authentic, The canoes are Papua New Guinea canoes that are 100 to 150 years old. We have artifacts that are including a Mayan god that's 1,600 years old. A lot of the artifacts are authentic from around the world. So I'd like to say it's not, your dad's Tiki Bar, it's your granddad's Tiki Bar.
And you're preserving that. And the cool thing about, the preserving it in the way that you are is that it's not an individual's Tiki Bar. It's open to the public, and everybody can go in there and see it.
That's what's also special. And I recognize looking around here, the idea is collections are no good unless people get to see them and experience them. It's really a sad thing for people to put wonderful items and historic items in boxes or in rooms that get closed off or in places where just one person can see them and enjoy them. Yeah. So a lot of the fun of this is actually finding these things and saying, people will see this and get to wonder what it is and learn more about it.
Well, our favorite character, Indiana Jones, famously said that belongs in a museum, right? So this is interesting because, this stuff does belong in a museum, but I mean, what is a museum, right?
Yeah.
And can you make a museum more fun and more accessible? Because I think a lot of people, don't go to museums,
yes,
but they'll go to a bar and they'll go to dinner. And if it's an experience on top of that, you get to show that stuff off.
That's exactly. Yeah. And it's I call it a cabinet of curiosities because the original cabinet of curiosities were people, who would make these collections that they wanted to show off to their friends. And slowly those collections grew until they were too big for individuals to have, and those became the basis of modern museums.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of a modern cabinet of curiosities where all these things get collected and are shown to people. And the idea is that on an ongoing basis, people get to interact with them. And that creates a different bond. In a museum, you see it's a little bit overwhelming, and you see a lot of wonderful things, but you don't have that personal connection necessarily. And in a place where you're eating and meeting with friends and talking and having that different type of experience, you can bond also with the environment, and you can bond with the elements of history that are around you. And that, I think, is really important.
That's so cool. I mean, that's what we're about here, right?
Yeah, that's why
I think that's why we invited you and want to have this conversation, because we've been around LA doing this for a while, and you guys have too, and it's very, very like-minded people, right?
Yeah, you can tell, because you can tell by what people have created and brought back and discovered and found and are parts of the collection here.
So now that we kind of know what you did, where it came from, I kind of want to know how you did it. How did you go about designing this? Because when you got Clifton's 1, maybe 2 stories, right? 1.5 stories were good to go. And now you have 6 floors of spaces that people can explore and experience, and it's basically open to the public. How did you go about doing that? It's a huge undertaking.
Yes, and it's an ongoing. I think anybody who does any construction project, even if it's like a remodel in their house, these things never end. They start and they continue and they grow and they change and they morph into all sorts of things. So that's.
Are you done?
I am not even close to being done.
If you were to put a number on it, 70% done, 80% done?
I would say 0% done. It's all,
oh, wow.
It's in a constant flow of creation. There's things that change, as I find things that I think fit a certain location more, or I think tell the story more, I'll change it out. So if there's something that's more, not necessarily more authentic, but more part of that narrative, then I'll add it.
So how did you start, though? When you walked in, I mean, you arranged. I'm sure you had some ideas, but you purchased it from the family, and you walk in day one. The keys are handed over, and it's yours. What do you do?
It's really strange that usually when I see a space, and the only spaces I'll get involved with is if I walk in and I can see it from day one what I want it to be. So I don't necessarily know the details, but I know the sense of it. So strangely enough, I walked up to the 2nd floor, and I was telling Robert Clinton, who I was negotiating the deal with, and I said, it's going to be really cool when there's a tree right here. And he's looking at me like, I'm not sure what that means exactly. And I said, you'll see. So
how much? So how long did it kind of take you to develop the tree idea?
The tree idea was instant. The problem was figuring out somebody who could actually build it. So, I also do some work now actually with Disney, which is really interesting because through the Diane Disney connection, I started doing stuff with Disney. And what's interesting is when you work with the Disney people, you talk about a tree, is very different than talking to the Los Angeles building department, for example. So dealing with the building department was, I'm building a tree, and they just look at me like my head just exploded. And, dealing with Disney, you say I'm building a tree, and they're like, oh, good, what species? So that's a difference. So finding somebody who could, in Los Angeles, build a tree, and not just a tree, because you could build, a prop tree and a set, and that was relatively easy, but this has to survive,
permanent
kids and nightlife and, everything else. So this was quite a thing. And I ended up with a French company with sculptors that actually came, 5 separate sculptors who came and sculpted the tree.
There's nobody down in Anaheim that can do it?
Not that could build a permanent one.
Huh.
So yeah, it was quite an adventure with that.
So you had this concept of the tree, and did you have all the I guess the design concept of ascending through the space?
Yes. I felt that was sort of what was needed, was this sense of, first of all, getting somebody to walk up to a Tiki Bar on the 4th floor is not an easy,
Is there an elevator?
There's an elevator, but what's beautiful about it, people when they get there, they don't realize they just climbed 4 stories of stairs.
Because you're exploring,
Because
right?
they're exploring. They're just discovering things along the way, and they're just completely lost in that. And once they get there, they're semi-disoriented. They don't know where they've actually arrived. So if I said to somebody, and when I originally told somebody I was building the Pacific Seas on the 4th floor, and I was going to be putting a big boat there and some other things, again, they looked at me like my head exploded. But the idea was that you just take people on this adventure, and as you do that, they want to see more. They want to discover more. And that would be very natural.
So your company is called The Neverlands, right?
Yes.
Can you explain what The Neverlands means?
Yes. So we're building, and this is sort of it came about right before the pandemic, and the pandemic was both good and bad for what we were doing. There's a sense that Clifton's and Edison have been this intersection of the real and the imagined. So there's these locations that have these incredible historic real elements, but they're also living in this romanticized fantasy world. So the idea was to be creating these physical intersections between those worlds. And that's what Walt Disney did, that's what Clifford Clinton did, and they created these wonderful spaces. But now technology is allowing us to explore the imaginary world in ways that they could only imagine themselves. So the idea now was creating digital twins of these locations and allowing sort of a virtual experience and an augmented reality experience that augments this. So that not only are you in a 5-story and 6-story location, or you're in an underground power plant, you're actually in worlds that connect with this fantasy and wonder of legend and lore. So all of those pieces are going to become part of these locations.
That sounds like it's going to get pretty wild.
It's going to get very wild. It's already starting to get wild, and the pandemic, a lot of it is through projections, a lot of it is through interactive technologies. For example, with telephones or with jukeboxes that play certain specific music to specific eras, and if you have that, the person at the bar will serve you a drink from that era. And there's things that start creating this connectivity of the story.
So hold on a sec. So I kind of see this, but we're talking about it from a very high level, like conceptual. Can you kind of give us an idea? Because not everybody has put on a VR headset or is in that world of knowing what VR is.
Yes.
So. Or augmented reality, right? So can you kind of tell us exactly what it might, I mean, I know it's in conceptual, but what might it look like? What might a person experience, like from their point of view? They would walk in to Clifton's, and how would they interact with VR?
There's actually things called interactives that we're creating. So one of the things that's really, and unfortunately the pandemic kind of blew this up a little bit because of all the chip shortages and every other shortage that one can imagine. But the idea is creating interactives so that anything that is a physical item within the space can be a portal to the virtual twin. So things that you would not automatically think, like a telephone or a jukebox or a radio or a television or just a physical screen behind you, that becomes its own portal. So we're trying to make it device free, so you don't have to actually put on a headset, for example. You can walk by, for example, a screen. That screen will interact with you and potentially other guests that are actually in the virtual twin. So
things that are props you can now use.
You can now use. And they will communicate both with you, and you can communicate to others through them. So the idea is truly creating a frictionless and seamless physical, real location that interacts with this virtual location.
So it sounds like that almost like eliminates the problem you have with square footage, right?
Exactly.
You have a space, and you've done an incredible job curating an experience, and like you said, by the time they get to the 4th floor, they're lost.
Yes.
Right? They've climbed four stories, and they're up there, and they don't know where they are, and that's great. But now they can continue past in the virtual world, either with a headset or a screen, and that expands the.
This is how the pandemic actually sort of accelerated a lot of this, because suddenly people were interacting with people across the globe, virtually. So people got very used to. Before the pandemic, weren't as used to Zoom, for example. After the pandemic, they're very used to being able to communicate with somebody anywhere. So the idea that you could actually go out to drinks or go to a social engagement or go see a show completely virtually before the pandemic didn't exist. Now the idea is that you could go to a show, experience it with somebody who's in New York, who's not near. So you can actually have their presence physically within the space, as well as experience it yourself. So you can go visit if you can't get to, if you're homesick, if anything else. So the idea is truly, melding technology, history, and this interactive new culture.
Wow. That's going to be huge.
It's where it seems everything is going eventually. So the question is, now's the time.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned shows. Do you guys do shows at
Yes.
Clifton's? Tell me about some of the shows that you guys put on.
Yeah, we're actually reintroducing finally. So after the pandemic was obviously a small bump in the road. So for 2 years we were closed, by the way. So we finally got back up and running. And we're slowly expanding hours and whatnot. But so we do have shows. We have, in fact, actually the performers here today have played in Clifton's, and we'll be back. So, so we have.
It's a small world.
It's very, very small world.
Broadway, right?
Exactly. This being.
Oh, here we go. Go ahead and keep playing that. Was that it? This is a small clip of the show. And this is on a stage just at the base of the tree?
No, this is actually within Pacific Seas. So Pacific
really?
Seas has its own stage, and then it's also got a performance space within a 1935 Chris craft that's in the center of the space.
Inside the boat?
Inside the boat.
That's very Jimmy Buffett.
Yes.
So how often do you have these shows?
Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. So, and the idea is that we're continuing to expand that. We're also, for the first time, we used to have a lot of vintage and historic bands within the Brookdale Ballroom. Mm-hmm. And so we're finally, actually next week, going to be bringing that back. The Moontones are going to be performing live. So it's really exciting to see the space again sort of create this classic nightlife and experience that's been dark for almost 2.5 years now.
So I have a question. When you walk around this place, how do you experience it?
Different things. One of the, the wonderful thing is meeting interesting people and meeting and hearing unusual stories. So things like, I'll walk by and somebody introduces me. One of the things was this, a woman ran in and was looking for a host. And she seemed elderly, and I was surprised she was running as fast as she was. And she asked how old I thought she was. And I didn't want to say exactly, but I figured, early 80s maybe. And she said it's her 103rd birthday. And it was, she actually it was the last day she was allowed to drive because her driver's license expired on the birthday. Yeah. And she wanted to drive to Clifton's because she remembered going there with her grandmother.
And what did she think of the place?
Insane. And she made the funniest comment because she was looking at this big tree and she says, God, I remember that tree when I was here with my grandma. And she's like, but wasn't it on a different floor? And I thought, well, okay, it's a different, you remember part of it. Which,
interesting.
But she also remembered, she had gone to an original Charlie Chaplin film before she had gone to Clifton's, which was just really, it's wonderful hearing those kind of stories. And that's what telescopes the history, and that's what creates these wonderful layers that I think are so fascinating.
So as you walk through, do you ever just kind of enjoy it, or are you always looking for change that story up a little bit?
Always changing the story up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I watch to see what people are interacting with and what they're enjoying themselves, and things that, that we have, for example, a meteorite, and it's a 4.7 billion-year-old meteorite that's the centerpiece of the Gothic bar. And that's actually
cool.
It's christened the Bradbury by Ray Bradbury's daughter. And so, because it's sort of the birthplace of science fiction, and the best thing to do is to put a primordial piece of the solar system at the center of it. So having that, I noticed that people, they cheers their drink to it, and they tap a drink on it for good luck. And so that's become a little bit part of the program that we do. And so I learned things from how people use it.
Because you didn't invent that tradition. That just came about.
No, that came about. So.
Does it feel good when you see people using the space that you created in unique ways?
I love to see the ripple effect and the echoes of an original inspiration. So where you had something that happened that inspired me to create something, and that in turn inspired somebody to create something else, I think is wonderful, because that will continue. And then I feel like I've done something.
That's pretty cool. So how long ago did you get this? I want to get a sense for how long it took you to put this together. 2009.
Yes.
And you're exactly 0% done right now, right?
Exactly. So around 2045, I'll get to about 5%.
Do you have any other projects on the horizon?
Yes. Actually, I am working with Disney on one project. That's a similar type concept. The thing that's amazing about these projects versus some of the Disney stuff is Disney is very much about complete fantasy. It's complete make-believe. So there's very little authenticity within a lot of the product, and that's intentionally so. That's not a bad thing. It's just a different choice. So what's interesting is actually blending and bringing and introducing authenticity to the projects there. So I'm working on that now.
Tell me about that neon right there.
Yes, that was actually the coolest thing I've ever discovered in my entire life, in terms of just as a weird, unexpected
I figured
thing.
you put that picture and I didn't understand it, so.
Exactly. It's like, why is that there? That's actually the world's oldest piece of neon that's currently actually in use, and it's in the basement of Clifton's. And Clifford Clinton was very much into innovation. He always wanted the greatest, newest, best, finest, most interesting thing. And one of the things he utilized a lot at the time was neon. And he thought neon was this great way, that it was the way of lighting of the future. So he had redone in 1939 most of the lighting to become neon. And so at some point over the years, they had done remodels, and what ended up happening is this piece of neon got embedded in a wall. And somehow it also had been disconnected from the main panel and connected to the lighting from under the street. So this thing wasn't even connected to the building.
So it came on at night?
It didn't even just come on at night. I had disconnected the power to the building to do the construction, and it was still on.
Always a scary thing for an electrician.
It's the ghost of, it's one of those things you go, okay, something's, but it was on a wall, and it actually led to an even more bizarre story. It was literally on the wall in the basement, and I was there with flashlights, and I turned off the flashlight, and I saw this light glow, so you couldn't really see the whole thing, and I thought, okay, is that the building next door? I thought, the possibility was that I was looking into the basement of the neighbor building. It's the only thing that made sense. So after digging it out, I found out that there's this incredible piece of neon that's still lit, that literally the only time apparently it's been off is if the power grid was off to the city. And the primary time that was off, from what I could tell, was during the air raid and the blackout conditions during World War II. So, and that potentially also a storm or something of that nature.
And that's how you have free power now, right?
Now I have, and I connected the entire building. Shouldn't say that. shouldn't say that. But so that thing has been on literally almost continuously since 1939.
Did you tell the city about it?
Actually, yes.
Did you connect it to the building power?
We ended up having to do. We actually had the Neon Museum come out and actually do the transition, because it's the same original transformer and everything. And it's 25 years older than the other, in quotes, oldest neon. It was that far, and usually these things, they lose their, the integrity, and it starts, the gas is let out. This one is bright and completely there.
So is this visible if we go down to the basement?
Yes, there's a plaque.
So the basement's open now?
Part of the basement's open. The rest of it is still being curated.
So what is the basement? So you took us up.
Yes.
Right? So now take us underground.
So if you go under, you go beneath the forest floor. So there's this sense that that's where science meets imagination meets fantasy. And this is where sort of the alchemists live. And it's a place where, scientific invention and nature blend. And then
sprout a tree.
This magical, amazing tree. And what's interesting is, one of the things that I found out in Edison is right off of Spring Street. And people think spring being like spring, summer, winter, kind of, it's not. There's a spring there. There's an underground spring. And so the Edison kept filling up with water. And I'm trying to figure out why, and it ends up we're on a spring. But it was one of the springs that actually led to the Native American culture actually creating a settlement there. And so it was this wonderful original origin story for the area that there was this magical spring that's near downtown. And it became Bimini Springs, which was a resort spa, actually not that far from here. And so there's this magical spring beneath basically Spring Street and Clifton's and Edison, and this is the place where that magic starts and sprouts all this imagination above. So there's this whole narrative to the location.
It's amazing. It's amazing when you see a guy like you that has a mind that thinks through things like this. What the power of it, right? What you can create and how cool it is. Because I mean, you walk into Clifton's and it's one of those things. It's somehow. I mean, it's obviously amazing, but it does have a feel to it. And naturally, the first time I went, I mean, I think I'm kind of an explorer, but I was just amazed. And I was looking at this, looking at that, and that happened naturally. You didn't have to tell me to do it. I just started exploring, and that's my nature. But I watch other people go in there, and people that might not be explorers, they get into it.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's one of the things that's wonderful. And you're asking about like what I walk through and what how I experience the space myself. One of the things that's interesting is people tend to drag each other on tours, and they want to show each other things.
Yeah, let me show you my favorite thing.
Exactly, this thing that you may not have seen, or or what is it? And then you see them looking up to find out and discover. One of the things like downstairs in the basement is it's filled with these wonderful scientific curiosities, and the idea is going to be let people both interact with them, like we were talking about the interactives, but also try and guess what they were.
Yeah.
What is this wonderful thing that somebody engineered, 120 years ago?
I think I did that my second time I was there. The first time I was there, I was looking around. The second time I brought my wife, and I was like, come here, let me show you this. I immediately took her up to something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but start taking people on tours.
Yeah, it's this wonderful sense of exploration, and that's the idea that really drives me.
Yeah. That must be cool to see people go through it and be inspired.
Yeah, that's the fun. That's the rewarding part.
So we've got a bunch of people out here. Who has a Tiki Bar? Anybody build a Tiki Bar? Anybody gonna build a Tiki Bar after this? Well, I want to open it up to questions from the audience because we've got a lot of interesting people out here, and I'm sure they have some pretty pointed questions for you about how you did stuff. So raise your hand, and Lance going to give you the microphone here. No questions. There we go. All the hands go up now. Nobody wanted to be the first. Scott Crawford.
I'm Scott Crawford, 1215. A lot of you don't know about me, but I was president of Frank Lloyd Wright's Friends of Hollyhock House. I helped raise $17 million for the restoration and also worked very hard on the Ennis House. So I know restoration. So when I heard that you were going to do Clifton's, I thought, it's going to be a big failure. Nobody can restore that place. It's going to be a loser. So then I went very close to the opening. You did an amazing job. Just the dusting alone on that place. Congratulations, congratulations.
Thank you.
Hi. I had a question about your creative process. So it's clear that you had a vision when you came into these spaces, but they also have to be functional spaces that earn money. So how do you balance your vision of something where that may contradict with maybe industry best practices about how to earn money and run businesses and things like that?
Yes. It's interesting. I have a strange background, and it probably started at birth. My father is a scientist, and my mother is an artist. And so I look and have always looked at things with sort of two very distinct eyes. One being immediately what's the vision and what's compelling me to create this, and what that looks like. The other is how do I make it work, and how does it function? And the two are absolutely equal in intention and importance. There's no doubt that making the world's most beautiful, interesting tiki bar will have no meaning if it closes the next week and nobody's going to see it and enjoy it. So the sense is always that it has to work, it has to function, and how do I build that and make that a part of the creative endeavor? And I don't usually see that actually as a negative. The reason I like to do historic projects, they give you a set of parameters you have to work around. They force you into creative problem solving. And that's sort of a wonderful way of approaching something. It's the most horrifying thing is having a complete blank canvas that you could do anything, because then the choices, there's too many choices. But when you have something that's like, for example, the Clifton space had the historic, the area which is actually called Forest Glen, which has the fireplace and whatnot. Being able to make sure that I could meet ADA codes and fire codes and some of the other health code issues created a really sort of a fun puzzle for me. And that puzzle was what's important, what here is keeping the integrity of the space and the original spirit of it, and then you build in what needs to happen, functionality. So.
Saw some other hands up here. Who else had a question?
I think it's interesting too, because if you don't build a place that people want to come to,
yeah,
you might be doing something wrong, right?
Yep.
Hi. Just wondering, I have a question in two parts. Are you going to Pacific Seas after this? And if so, can you get us all in?
Strangely, we're in the middle of introducing a new menu actually right now. So I am actually going over to do a tasting after to find out the next 9 items that we're adding. So we're doing an around the world in 80 bites menu, which is actually kind of a fun way to explore the world through culinary dishes. So I am definitely doing that, and I don't even know if I can get in tonight. But if anybody does want to go, definitely if you just mention this experience event, I will make sure that they let anybody through. We have what's called a travel desk at the front. Ask for the travel desk. Even if we're not dressed properly? Are we all dressed properly for Tiki? It's funny because originally at Edison we had a dress code because we wanted to elevate the experience, so it was this sort of sense of this echo of historic nightlife in Los Angeles. And that was at a time when nobody was doing dress codes in Los Angeles. And so that was a heavy lift. And so I was thinking of doing part of that also in Clifton's. But in a tiki bar, what is appropriate dress? And when you're in a tiki bar, you also want to be able to explore the rest. So can you just go to the tiki bar if you're dressed a certain? So we decided to just be, to tell people to be respectful of the historic nature of the venue and their fellow guests. And so far, that actually people have done that.
I got excluded from the dress code at your place. And I was just like, okay. I was like, well, come back better.
This is what's always interesting is getting, and this goes to some of the question of like the creative versus the practical. I can sit there and want this amazing experience for guests, but each person brings something different and how they want to experience the space. And it's difficult sometimes also to translate that to a third party like a guard or something,
right?
Or the door people, and explain like what is something that's a historic and thoughtful dress.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know what it meant.
Yeah, and that guard's going to make that determination. It's going to make some people mad.
Yes.
I wasn't mad, though. I was like, ooh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, as long as it's done respectfully, and as long as people understand that it is a heightened experience. The idea is that it is a special place. And it's meant to just enjoy. We don't want to be the in quotes, fun police.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you're entering something that's really unique.
Interesting.
Yeah, so just wanted to say thank you for preserving history, because it seems in this day and age, buildings get torn down and no one really cares. Well, no one seems to really care what it was, or much less cares about preserving it and turning it into something really cool. So thank you for that, because it's just a rare thing that really is appreciated. And also wanted to ask, the neon sign in the basement, do you have a background story of why it was originally made and what it was there for?
Yeah, I learned, I actually approached the family, and the Clifford Clinton's son, Don, is still alive. And at the time, I was able to ask him a couple of different things. And apparently it was actually the back of a transparency. So they had a lot of interesting, beautiful California transparencies throughout the space. And that was one of the transparencies. So that's as best as I could learn from what I could tell.
So what is it now?
It's a beautiful historic neon.
It's just exposed neon. Look at this crazy stuff. It's been lit for 100 years. Yeah.
Exactly. It's one of those things that nobody knows what's going to be really important 100 years from now. Is that going to be something that, it's like here, if anybody had thought that their, ejector seat was going to be something that's interesting for somebody to go look at, they wouldn't have thought necessarily so. But we find it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And
I just found that thing out in the desert, right?
No.
Yeah. Long story for another time.
That's what creates the interest. There's these wonderful stories, and then you start trying to figure out what happened and why and how it's there.
I want to know which one of those guys tied it into the city grid, because that seems like one of those shady moves that someone pulled in the 30s.
Yeah. There were some strange things going on in 39, especially in Clifton's.
All right, right back there.
Is the cafeteria coming back?
Absolutely. This is the #1 question. Always. That's, the most, one of the things, and this has always been a very, very difficult thing. There's that fine line, the idea is, and this touches all of the different subjects here, you want to preserve a place. You want to make sure that historically you're keeping it for generations, because Pacific Seas, the location that had the original Tiki location, is a parking lot right now. And it was changed into a parking lot because economically they couldn't sustain it. So the last thing one wants to do is build something, and this goes into the balance between the practical and the vision. So the last thing one wants to do is build a project that's not going to function. So one of the big things with the cafeteria was staying originally within as close to the spirit of the original cafeteria, but also still make it a functional part of the business and the community. What we found was that things had changed so much. There used to be 10,000 cafeterias in California. This was the last public cafeteria in California. So, and there's an obvious sort of reason, that they didn't all just decide, let's close at once. It was, a change in taste and demographics and the labor costs and all the cost models and whatnot. So the idea was that we still needed to create something that was economically viable. So we started to come up with what I felt was a really good sort of version of that. And then the pandemic hit. So we were building our version, and then the pandemic basically emptied downtown Los Angeles. So the offices are at 20% occupancy, so the people who are coming for lunch and for dinner are no longer down there. So there are locals that are down there. And then on weekends, there's some people who come down, but very, very few unless there's an event. So I'm still working on the exact model of how to make this function. But there's absolutely no doubt, because the cafeteria to me is the beating heart of the beating heart. So I don't see any version of Clifton's that doesn't have a cafeteria in it. So
that's cool.
That's the long answer.
Yes, hi. Have you ever done any theater there? Any sort of site-specific live theater performances?
We've done, yes, we actually have. We've done several live performances, and the intention actually is now, and Cathedral Grove was actually designed to create a really unique amphitheater space that has 3 separate stories for live performances. But there's actually 5 stages in the building, including in the basement. And the idea is to have performances in each of those, and both unique performances, but then also performances that allow you to see portions of that performance told in different levels at different places, so that you can sort of experience and discover it on your own.
Are you talking about like the same performance done at each 5 levels?
It's the same performance and elements of that performance, so that you're actually wandering through and getting pieces of it, and then you curate your own version of the performance.
That's cool. Right over here.
Hi, Steve Whiteman, member 1229 and second vice president. I just have a couple of quick questions. I haven't been to Clifton's before. I actually tried to go about 3 years ago or so, and you weren't open. So I was like, oh, I wasn't sure what was going on. And then I read the article about the neon in the paper in the Times. There was an article about it. It was kind of interesting. But I want to know, do you guys, is there reservations involved? Is there an entrance fee? Is there, how does it work?
It's a work in progress right now. As the pandemic, we're working through all of the logistics and the staffing issues. One of the things, and I think everybody has sort of experienced to different degrees this, staffing is impossible right now. And it's particularly impossible in hospitality and large hospitality, and particularly in downtown Los Angeles. So we've been having a lot of trouble just staffing up. And I've talked to, I have lots of different friends who have restaurants and bars and hospitality environments. It's the same story, is just getting people. So we do not have the staff yet to do reservations effectively, but we are slowly adding to it. So the expectation is within the next couple of months, certainly at the holiday season, we will have reservations.
Are you open, though, just to walk in?
Yes, fully open to walk in, and up until 9, there's no charge. On Thursdays, there's no charge. After 9, there's a $20 charge. So, and that actually, is a cover to cover the actual entertainment and whatnot that we add.
Very cool. Yep.
Hi, thanks for being here, and it's a wonderful experience here. I'm a big Ray Bradbury fan, kind of a Bradbury geek, in fact. And I'm a board member on the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum in Waukegan. And my daughter is directing and creating a documentary on Ray, and she would like to know if she could interview you to be in that film.
Definitely.
And also, to piggyback off that question, could you tell us about the Bradbury booth and your experiences with Ray?
Yeah, I actually, my timing was either good or bad, depending upon how one looks at it. I ended up becoming involved in 2009 with the project and negotiating the thing in 2008. And so I was actually lucky enough to walk Ray Bradbury through the property and have him tell me the stories about the location and the founding of the thing, and working with Ray Harryhausen and working with everybody up and through L. Ron Hubbard and various people. He told me about the bet that he made with L. Ron Hubbard to create Scientology, which actually happened strangely in the Bradbury booth. So he told me a little bit about that bet, and he told me just about the sense that modern science fiction literally and figuratively grew out of that location.
Wow.
And everything from, Star Wars and Star Trek to, Twilight Zone can trace their roots directly to that location and that time. So it's amazing recognizing. One of the things that's amazing about Clifton's is that, the bigger, the deeper dive you go in any direction, you find extraordinary things, and you could enjoy it just as an interesting location and walk through, or you could take a deeper dive and look into the architectural history, or you can look into the cultural history. You can find out about Ray Bradbury. You can find out about some of the other amazing authors that have gone through there. Jack Kerouac wrote On the Road in Clifton's, and it's actually mentioned in the scroll. And so there's just amazing legacy. And I feel really honored and lucky to be a part of that, and certainly to have met some of the people that have been involved. So that's been, I got to meet Richard Matheson, who also told very similar stories to Bradbury about sitting in Clifton's and having late night discussions about where science fiction is going and what the possibilities of the world were.
That's wild. So this is broadcast live, right? And we have a couple of questions from the chat, I believe. Is that right, Andy?
That's right. Thank you so much for being here. This next question is from the chat. Now that you've had the opportunity to walk through the Adventurers Club a little bit and see some of the things on the walls and on the floor, if there was one exhibit or artifact that you would borrow and put into Clifton's from here, what would it be?
I would have to say a mammoth is.
Yeah. You've been eyeing that mammoth skull in the back, huh?
I'm like, did that fit in the truck? But there's definitely so many different things. I'm just intrigued by stories. So when I see something, and whether it's the ejection seat, or it's some of the taxidermy, or it's individual medals from different people and different, whether it was a battle or whether it was for an honor of service, they're all fascinating. And to me, all of these stories make up what's special, and certainly about a place like this. I mean, you can feel the history and you can feel the legacy of people who are passionate about exploration and adventure, and that's pretty wonderful.
All right, one more question.
Yeah, I am fascinated by the way you've put together past and future, and particularly the interactive, because you were talking, this actually struck me as you were talking about staffing, because as we move forward, more and more of what we have and what we use is becoming AI. So can you expound on that sort of interactive part of the venue?
It's, it's starting in its embryonic form. I mean, what's wonderful about, again, this post-pandemic period, it introduced a lot of things that people weren't comfortable with prior, like QR codes, for example. And it allows people to, whereas people would look before the pandemic and look at a QR code and some would know and some wouldn't know, now everybody's very familiar with the fact that walking up to something, they can learn more or get a link to something, or they can connect with something. So the technologies are getting to the point where it's allowing people to work organically within their regular lives with technology. And nobody wants to sit at a table with 5 other people who are sitting with a device and are immersed in their own experience with a device as opposed to the experience that's surrounding them. And so to me, the big key is making it an organic piece of what we already do, so that hospitality becomes something so that a guest can, you can invite a friend again from New York, and that friend could be, whether they're projected on a wall, but they can see also, so you're breaking the wall between the technology so they're a natural piece of your environment. And I think that that's happening already, very slightly, but more and more the interactives will break that wall down. And the more we can make those interactives a natural element of people's lives, I think, the better our experience will be. And I think Clifton's is sort of an ideal location because it's already taking you on that adventure and that journey into imagination. So it's very easy to pierce that wall.
Thank you. Well, Andrew, thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So for those of you watching online too, thank you for joining us at the Adventurers Club. Next year, you're going to have to come to Tiki Night in person like all these people here. But I'm going to sign off now and say from the Adventurers Club, we'll see you next week.